And welcome back. We are going to continue our work on programming today, discussing the difference between a variable and a constant. Now, constants, or as they are sometimes referred to as literals, are simply just going to refer to, in this case, specific values that we have in our program. The biggest thing to keep in mind is that variables are intended to be able to change, whereas a constant or a literal is intended to not change. It's intended to kind of keep the same value all the time. Now, the biggest problem that we have with this is that when we look at numbers inside of a computer program, the number by itself doesn't necessarily carry any significance because a number is just a number. The program doesn't know what to do with it unless we tell it specifically what we want it to do. Therefore, when we start thinking about this, we want to think about a constant being a predefined number, so a number that's going to always have the same value. Now, constants are typically defined outside the main method, and there are also other modifiers such as final that we're going to look at that help indicate whether or not the value is actually said constant. Now, there are other ways that we can have constants that aren't necessarily numeric. However, most of the examples that we're going to look at and probably apply will probably be a numeric value. Now, the first thing we got to talk about is naming constants. Much of how, like when we looked at it with variables, naming constants is going to take kind of a similar approach. The first thing we got to, of course, do is avoid the duplication of it. Just like with variables, you can't have the same variable name the same thing. Same thing is going to happen here with the constants. You can't have two constants named constant rate, for example, because obviously it's going to cause a conflict. And additionally, just like with variables, we want to give them a defined meaning. Or what does this value that we're putting up here in our program actually mean? And just like with variables, again, we usually are going to initialize a variable to that numeric value. So whatever that constant variable is, will have a value attached to it. Now, constants are named very similar to variables, but there are a few differences between the two. So, for example, when we're naming our constants, all letters in the variable name are uppercase with an underscore between them. So in our example here, I have int numeric value equals 10. You'll notice that this is a little different than how we looked at this with normal variables. Normal variables, we use camel casing. With constants, we're going to use uppercase with an underscore in between because it helps differentiate to the programmer really quick that, hey, this is a constant value rather than just another variable. Now, there are some problems that we can have with constants if we aren't proactive with our programming. And you might have been able to detect some of this already on your own. All right. Well, the first thing is, if it's a variable, can we accidentally change the value of the constant? Isn't a constant supposed to be unchanging? Well, yes, if you're thinking that, that would be correct. And there are ways that we can address this. And the way we do that is we initialize a constant with the following header. We say public static final. So before we put this in front of any variable, this needs to go first. So I say public static final, then whatever we would do with that variable. So if we want to see this in an example, I would say public static final int numeric value equals 10. The public simply is just a word that means it's accessible by the program. We'll talk more about public and private later on. Static means it's a static value. It can be, we can call that value by name. Final just means that this is the final value. This is the modifier more than anything that keeps this value from changing. And of course, int is just the type, numeric value is the name, and 10 is just our value. Now, if we go ahead and look at this in a program here, one of the things we can see here is I set up a quick little lab here that we can look at. So I have double radius equals 5, pi equals 3.14, double goes circle area, radius pi. So this is just the area of a circle. And if I were to go ahead and run this program, you can see we get a value, which is great. But we could go ahead and say, radius could be something that we could change because we're going to have circles of different sizes. However, one thing that is not going to change is pi. Now, of course, we can get more precise with our values of pi, but let's just go ahead and assume that we're going to use 3.14. So what I'm going to do is I have to go above my main method here, and I'm going to create that public static final. And since this is a double, I'm going to put the double keyword. I'm going to call this pi. Remember, it's all uppercase because it's a constant. And I'm going to set it equal to 3.14. Now, the one thing you'll notice is that we don't have an error right now because this pi is all lowercase, this one's all uppercase. But what I want to do is I want to replace this value with the value of the constant. So this is going to change to the uppercase pi. And you'll notice one nice thing that Eclipse does for us, if it recognizes the constant, it makes it blue and puts this italicized on it so that we can really help you visually see that really easy. Even though we know it's all uppercase, this is a way for it to recognize, hey, this is a constant, this is a literal that is going to be used. Now, if we run our program, you notice we get the same value. Functionally, this is the same, but we don't want to go in and change pi. We want pi to always be the same. Now, we want to be able to change our radius, and that's perfectly fine, but the value of pi should remain constant, and that is exactly what we want to happen. And unlike a variable, again, if I had left that as pi in here, I could come in and plug in a different value for pi potentially that could change the output of my program. Right now, we can't do that here from code, but eventually we're going to get to where we can have the user come in and type values. And once they go and start typing those values, they can start changing the values of these variables. However, they won't be able to change the value here of these constants because, again, they're marked as final.